alaikum and welcome to our new series, The Psychology of Salah, where we are looking at Salah from an internal viewpoint and examining how we can understand our Salah more deeply and get more out of our Salah in this life, and obviously understand the purpose of praying as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wished us to understand it. Very often, of course, we are praying sometimes mechanically, or we are not present in our salah, and we might not understand the significance of all the components of the salah. So in this series, inshallah, we are going to be discussing this. And again, my guest is Brother Ghulam Abbas Laka, and welcome. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you again for giving us your time for this.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. By the grace of Allah, we have the opportunity to think about what the psychology of Salah can mean for us in a practical sense. Because whilst we know from a legal point of view, from an Islamic law point of view, you need to say your prayers 5 times a day. And that's well known. But what we spend less time thinking about is why. And what are the benefits of it? And how, and particularly, how can I get more value from what I am already doing, or indeed would like to do more of, for specific challenges that I'm facing in my life. So this practical aspect of Salah in its impact on our mental health and our well-being is what these discussions are really designed for. And inshallah, through the course of our journey, we began by looking at how we approach Salah, as well as the first step in the psychology of Wudhu. And we were looking at how the different steps of that ablution, of that washing, serve as reminders of our cognitive aspects, our thinking, how we think about different things, as well as our behaviors and what we do, and collectively giving us a handle on cognitive and behavioral aspects of our own therapy for ourselves. Wudhu can be a simultaneous connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a connection with ourselves. And from that, as we move forward, we consider other questions related to this topic. So, firstly, regarding the problems of stress and anxiety, and how in some cases these things can also relate to other mental health challenges like depression. One of the problems we find is that Salah is viewed as a burden. It's viewed as a really difficult thing that we have to do, and we just don't have the time for it in many cases. So, for example, a working person has a 1-hour lunch break and has to do wudu, has to do salah, has to get lunch, may have errands. It's difficult. Yeah. And I really respect that challenge. As someone who has myself struggled with that challenge during my professional career, it forced me to rethink my approach to Salah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His magnanimity does not require us to prostrate ourselves through 5 prayers a day for Him. He doesn't need that. If it's been required, it's for our benefit. And there are 2 aspects to that. Firstly, it doesn't need to take long. So in order to really get a lot of benefit from Salah, 10 minutes is more than enough. If it had required more, the required aspects of Salah would have been made longer than 10 minutes. The clue is in the teaching. The teaching is that you do your prayers in this way, this is what's required, and that can be done in 10 minutes. That means the benefit can be obtained in 10 minutes. If you have the luxury of being able to spend longer, that's great. Yeah. But for many of us, even 10 minutes is tough. And what I'm saying is, 10 minutes is enough to get a lot of value, provided we approach that Salah in a dynamic, active, psychological way, when we are conscious of our inner psychology, of the weather patterns inside, when we're really watching our thoughts, when we are watching our behaviors, when we are thinking about how the salah connects with the rest of our lives, how it relates to our worries. So for example, I may have something that I've been worrying about at work all day, but when I come to do wudu, in that moment of connecting with that water, I experience the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As I stand and move towards Qibla, towards the direction of Mecca, I am empowered that I am joining in a practice with all the other Muslims of this time, and indeed all the Muslims of all time.
Yeah.
So I have access to a greater source of power that transcends me. And that can be both liberating and empowering when I go back to reapproaching that problem that I was dealing with in the morning, when I get back to my desk at work, dealing with the same problem that I was before. The how of it changes. The experience of it changes. The problem might still be there, but my experience of that problem can be different. Through salah, I have separated that which was previously conflated. Previously, the problem and my stressful experience of that problem were together. But through the process of salah, I am able to separate the two and view that problem as it is, and view my experience as being independent of that. I can choose how I respond to that challenge. I can respond with anxiety and fear, or I can respond with a sense of empowerment that I have the ability to deal with it. I may not know the answer to this question yet, but I know I have the ability to find the answer. I may not have the answer to the cancer I have been diagnosed with, God forbid. But I know I have the spiritual strength, that Allah will give me the strength to be able to deal with it, to be able to speak to my loved ones about it appropriately. The event doesn't change, but our experience of it doesn't just change, but can be transformed. That's the invitation of salah. So that 5 times a day at regular intervals, and remember, we can't do all the 5 prayers in one go in the morning and say, okay, job done. I've done my 5 prayers. Now I can get on with the rest of the day. No. In the Quran, it says that we have made salah a timed prescription, that you cannot do it before a certain time of the day. The afternoon prayer cannot be said in the morning. The evening prayer cannot be said in the afternoon. So that we are given this as a dose, like a prescription for a medicine for the heart, for the soul, whereby we need to take this dose at different points in the day to nourish ourselves and to counter the negative effects that we may have suffered when engaging with the challenges and problems of the world out there. Now, this is not an idea that is new, that comes from engagement with modern psychotherapy, although we find it in that engagement. This is an idea that has in its roots Quranic teaching. So, when we look at Surah Ma'idah, Surah 5, verse 6, it says, Allah does not intend to create difficulty for you. Rather, He intends to purify you and to complete His favor upon you, so that you may be grateful. Well, there are 3 aspects to this in terms of the psychology of salah. Firstly, these teachings that we have, particularly those that come in the form of obligatory rules, these need to be viewed for the value they represent for us. This is not for creating difficulty. So if we feel that, gosh, it's really difficult to do this, we need to stop and reassess, what is the opportunity here? An Olympic weightlifter goes into the gym and doesn't necessarily think, oh gosh, this weight is heavy and it's difficult. If he or she did, they would be disempowered and they may not be able to lift as much. But rather, the Olympic weightlifter says, okay, there is a great event coming up and I am capable of getting a gold medal, but only if I do the requisite practice, if I do the requisite preparation. And the preparation for the Olympics does not start when the Olympic torch has been lit. It starts many years in advance, many steps in advance that are iterative and reinforcing, such that we don't just launch into Takbiratul Ihram, marking the beginning of the Salah. No, we've got the wudu and all the steps of that wudu. Exercising the muscle of mindfulness, of awareness, of connection with Allah, of connection with ourselves. And then moving into Qibla. And then adhan, ikama, niyyah. Then we reach Takbiratul Ihram. And inshallah we'll look at each of those individual stations through the course of our discussions. But it is important at this juncture to reiterate that the point of the psychology of Salah is to unlock the door to the value of it now. This is about the dua we recite in Qunut. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. Oh Allah, give me blessings and grace in this world, now, as well as in the hereafter. The psychology of Salah is the key to unlock the فِي الدُّنْيا حَسَنَة of Salah. And this is why it's so important that we find it in our primary sources. The psychology of Salah is not a new subject. It is a subject as old as Islam itself, as old as Salah itself, because it has come with it. It is integral to it. And therefore, when we approach it, this verse that we look at, Surah Ma'idah, verse 5, verse 6, highlights to us that actually these tools are intended as a form of purification. And this is really how psychotherapy can work. That, for example, if we look at cognitive behavior therapy as one form, we are becoming aware of our negative cognitions and our positive cognitions so that we may purify ourselves by releasing the thoughts about ourselves and other people that are unhelpful, and similarly with behaviors, with what we do, and to replace those negative things with helpful things that support the fulfillment of our objectives, our niyyah. It's not by coincidence that the Salah begins with a niyyah. So that process of unfolding, that psychological evaluation of ourselves, our thinking, our behaviors, our practices, is all aimed for a purpose. The goal setting, which is a part of many therapies, at the beginning of any therapy, the goal setting you do with your therapist, that's really the niyyah for the activity. Similarly with Salah. Now, therefore, when we approach Salah from this particular verse, it shifts our experience from this is a burden to this is actually a tool. Just as the athlete steps into the gym for a workout to strengthen the muscles, to develop ourselves towards achieving that which truly inspires us.
And actually interesting that you're talking about goals, because again, especially like there are young people out there who they hear about the great masters of this path and they naturally desire to be like them, to model themselves on them, strive, to perfect themselves. But at the same time, they might be living in an environment that isn't conducive. There may not be very many, good teachers around, or there may be other, they may not have developed as people to a point of getting to that point that they want to reach. And so actually breaking this down, breaking the Salah down, is like, in a way, giving manageable goals. So what do I want to attain in my wudu, rather than like the overall prayer. We actually hear of some very pious people who would, and people may find it strange, I don't find it strange, but who would disappear when they start Salah. I've heard of experiences of this, where someone leading the Salah will say Allahu Akbar and they've disappeared into another place or time, I don't know.
Well, yes, please.
And so, some people might say, well, I want to kind of get to that position where I'm so high, I'm kind of, transcending the laws of physics. But actually, if we are, like here we're talking about the Qibla, okay, you want to maybe achieve this point, but what about, first of all, the science of facing Qibla? If we're breaking it down step by step.
Yes. Well, I'm not so interested in spiritual transportation through salah in terms of relieving ourselves of our physical existence. I'm much more interested in the opposite, which is actually becoming truly embodied
Right.
in the state we're in and being mindful of where we are and what we're doing. So I entirely agree with the point you made about breaking it down, because therein lies the mindfulness. If I'm thinking about this step of wudu and why I'm doing it, or why I'm turning towards Qibla, then therein lies the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the goal that inspires us, the qurbatan ilallah, the proximity, the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is achieved through the mindfulness of that moment. But in that moment, I'm also free of all the ruminations that I've been engaging in that may be maintaining the anxiety or depressive episodes I may be experiencing. So wudu and salah can be helpful in managing this process. But equally, for some people, it can be abused. And it can actually become a source of anxiety itself. Yeah. So we hear of people who can become obsessive and compulsive about the way they do their wudu, their ablution, or their prayers, their salah. And this is not new either. And we've got examples in the teachings for how to address it. So Abdullah bin Sinan approached Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, and this is in Al-Kafi, and said to him that I mentioned to him about a man who repeatedly and excessively does wudu and salah because he is worried that he hasn't done it right, so he keeps doing it again and again. And the response of Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam was, why does this person follow shaitan? And Abdullah bin Sinan said, I responded that, no, he's not following shaitan, he's actually trying to be diligent. Yeah. And the Imam said, well, ask him what is driving that need to keep redoing it. And he himself will tell you that it is not coming from Allah. It is coming from the other. And so we need to think about how we define shaitan, not necessarily as Iblis, as the devil, but really about the forces that take us away from the beneficial path for ourselves, and that which leads us into disease, mental disease, spiritual disease, psychological disease. And this person says, well, he went and he asked him, and when he spoke to this person, he understood that actually this compulsiveness is not really related to the teachings. And this is why Imam Sadiq was saying this is not from the teachings. And we have a rule. So just as we've got laws about the prayers, we also have laws to protect us against obsessiveness and compulsive behavior, to say, look, if there is ever any doubt, shak, just doubt, is batil, is invalidated. So that if you are unsure whether you did something properly or not, you are supposed to assume that you did do it properly. Yeah. If you are unsure whether you did the prayers at all, or whether you did the prayers in the right way, you can assume that you did do it, and you did do it properly. So the assumption is on the positive, not on the negative. So when we have this kind of repetitive behavior, this compulsive behavior, this rule about salah, that assume the positive and move on, can be translated to other aspects of our lives as well, about which we may be obsessive and compulsive. So there are translational aspects of these rules about salah to how we may translate them into our lives. And that brings me to the next stage in our journey. That when we think about this process of translating the process and method of salah into the process and method of how we live our lives, and more importantly, how we experience our lives from a mental health point of view, one of the steps that is critical is Qibla. So having done wudu, we're coming to a place that we want to pray. The direction, orientating ourselves towards the direction of Qibla is very important. Because if we are trying to achieve that proximity, as in Surah Qaf, Surah 50, verse 16, we are reminded, وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, that we're closer to this person than their jugular vein. So what does that mean? And why do I need to then point in a particular direction? Why do I have to pray in a direction that is not congruent with the layout of the room? What is it about this turning towards Qibla? Well, one of the clues we get from that is from the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, his holy progeny, when he talks about how, and this is reported in Biharul Anwar, he says, say each of your prayers as if it was your last prayer. And Imam Sadiq alayhi salam guides, as per Shaykh al-Saduq, he says, O servant of Allah, when you offer your prayer, say that prayer, offer it as someone who bids farewell and fears never to return to that encounter with that person, with that beloved. And we know that when the beloved and the beloved meet and they part, that moment, they are there, they are present in the connection. And this is the kind of connection that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is teaching about the mindfulness that is required at that point, such that Qibla then shapes our psychological orientation. It's not just about our physical direction, because when we are praying in that particular direction, what direction is that? It's a direction towards the Kaaba, towards Mecca, that all other Muslims are also pointing in. So there is a unity aspect to this, that I am praying to that same point that all other Muslims are. But so it's not just a spatial aspect in terms of all points in space, in terms of at least on earth. So all people on earth who are Muslim pray towards that same point spatially. But also there's a temporal aspect, there's an intertemporal aspect over time, that Muslims from the beginning up to today have all prayed to that, in that direction. So when I turn towards Qibla, I am joining in that great wave of Muslim intention towards connecting to that point of Tawheed, of connecting with the unity of Allah. It ceases to be my little prayer in my little office, in my little life. It takes on a meaning far more powerful and empowering just by turning towards Qibla and placing Qibla in its rightful place of what it means to orientate towards that direction that all the saints have orientated themselves, that all the Muslims of today are orientating themselves towards. It is connecting with a much wider movement of spiritual energy, of purpose, of direction. And there's also an aspect of gratitude. When we look at the modern psychology of gratitude, there are a number of studies to say that actually having a regular gratitude practice is protective for your mental health.
Right.
And yet, we don't need to wait till the end of Salah when we do sajda of shukr, when we do the prostration of thankfulness. Right at the beginning, there is cause to stand in a state of grateful awe, that as we turn towards Qibla, we are turning towards that, we're tapping into that movement that transcends us and has carried us to this point and will carry generations to come. But psychologically, there's another dimension to this turning as well. It is not just an orientation towards, it's not just turning towards Qibla, it's also a turning away from that which distracts me from Qibla. So psychologically, therefore, the psychology of Qibla has aspects to it of conscious, deliberate reorientating of our thinking, of reframing our thought patterns into those approaches that help us in our lives. So if I have a thought that I am stupid and I will fail my maths exam and I'm no good at maths, there's a very good chance I'll fail my maths test. But if I take the view that I struggle with maths, but I have the ability to work, and I can tap into a force that's bigger than me to support my efforts, and in that spirit approach my maths lessons, I'm likely to do far better. Even if I'm not a genius, I'm likely to do far better than I otherwise would have. And that reorientating towards the positive is really what Qibla is about, because it also highlights those movements that we are making that are unhelpful, what the psychology literature would refer to as maladaptive, that really are taking us towards psychological problems, anxiety, maybe depression ultimately, that I may get depressed about being so terrible as a student. But actually, if I reshape that, if I use Qibla as a tool to reorientate myself and tap into a much greater force and a much greater power that carries me along in my journey as I join the movement of Muslims throughout time aiming towards this point of Kaaba, it changes what the Kaaba means and what the Qibla means in our orientation to it.
And also, I think, like I was saying previously, I think stepping on that prayer mat is a time to reflect upon who you are or what you are as a human being. And again, that facing Qibla is a part of sort of stepping into that stillness or stepping into that different state. Yes. Where, like you say, okay, at least I'm going to make the intention that nothing's going to distract me. This is my time, again, with the infinite, and time to, like you say, reflect. In fact, I've never done that reflection, thinking about, I have done the reflection on, I am praying towards Qibla just like millions of other Muslims around the world are doing at this moment and continuously doing. I think I haven't thought about so much in time, like how I'm following this continual stream, going right back to the first time that Salah was performed.
In some very difficult times.
Yeah.
So when we look throughout Islamic history, people have, the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt have performed the Salah on the day of Ashura.
Yes.
That Fajr Salah and what Imam Hussain recited thereafter, the du'as. The connection with Salah at times of difficulty are well explored and written about in Islamic history. And so when I am thinking about the problem I've had at work, and then I stand on that prayer mat and I turn in that direction, there's something so much more I can build on and seek help with. But equally there's a danger to this as well, which is that it becomes ritualistic.
Yeah. That
the process of finding Qibla is not an inner finding of the inner compass. It becomes, what is it on the compass on my prayer mat? Yeah. Or more recently, what does my prayer app say on my phone?
I've still got one of those metal ones made in China.
Exactly. Yeah. I still have one that my father used to use, before mobile phones. Right. And that was what he used to use when he was traveling, and I keep that with me because it's a reminder to me that actually the process of finding Qibla is not just about an angle. It's about the effort of it. So now if I'm somewhere I don't know Qibla, I take out my phone, turn on my Qibla app, and there's a compass built in, and it says, that way is Qibla. Okay, fine. But there's much more to it than that. What that old compass of my father represents for me is the work required to find Qibla. Now, that work might take a minute or just a moment. And as we said earlier, our Salah might take only just 10 minutes in its entirety. All the steps that we talk about might just take 10 minutes. But if we connect with just one step at one moment, we transform the value we've got from the whole exercise. Yeah. And if in turning towards Qibla, we find the work that we have done in finding the direction, a reflection of the inner compass, at a much wider level, am I going in the direction I should be in my life as a whole? Is this the direction that I should be traveling in? And is this the way in which I should be moving? So Qibla takes on a much greater purpose in terms of wider goal setting and the wider motivation for our lives as a whole.
Yeah.
Regardless of how easy it might be to use an app to find the direction. But that direction raises a question of, what is this direction? And what does the inner compass say about the inner Qibla. And I'd like to conclude on this discussion with a teaching from Salatul Arifin, Sirru Salat, the text on the mysteries of Salat, which talks about how the Urafa, the spiritual masters, when they identified the direction of Qibla, their orientation was towards the Baytul Ma'mur, the heavenly Qibla, above the Kaaba itself. So that they were then orientating in multidimensionally.
Right.
So they were adding a third dimension. So what I was talking about previously was spatially, that across the world,
Yeah.
in all spaces we point towards that, and across time, intertemporally, throughout history. But the Urafa add a third dimension of interdimensionally, that actually they are orientating themselves towards the heavenly Kaaba, so that they become cognizant of tasting heaven on earth through that miraj of Salah. When we are told that Salah can be the spiritual ascension, the miraj of the believer, we teach that to our young children in madrasa. But we don't really reflect on the psychology of it. Because really what that means is that we can transform our experience to have heaven on earth through that Salah. But that means when you enter that elevator of Salah, you don't just get in and get out on the ground floor. You get in and you press the highest button possible to take the elevator all the way up. And that's the example of the Urafa, in how they teach what the process of Qibla means for the orientation of their Salah and the opportunity that lies in doing so.
Inshallah. Thank you. Beautiful point to conclude with. And we will be continuing with our series. So inshallah, look forward to seeing you in the next program. Thank you so much for today's show. And thanks very much to our audience for watching. Inshallah, this program was useful for you, as it has been for me. And we will see you, inshallah, in the next one. So do keep watching. Assalamu alaikum.
Ahlul Bayt TV, the holy household for every household.